It's our last episode of 2014. We're going to be chatting with Dan Langille about the upcoming BSDCan conference. We're going to find out what's planned and what sort of presentations they're looking for. As usual, we're going to have answers to all your viewer-submitted questions and all this week's news. Coming up on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 70, Daemons in the North, recorded December 31st, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week, this on New Year's Eve. Wow, actually, I was kind of surprised when I look at the calendar that we decided to do a live episode today, but we couldn't leave you hanging with two pre-recorded ones in a row, right? Can't do that. So, of course, we have a live episode today, and there's lots of news. A lot of stuff happened even over the Christmas holiday. So, first of all, we hope you guys all had a Merry Christmas and wish you a Happy New Year tomorrow as well. If you're watching this live or if you're watching the recorded version, we hope you had a good New Year's. But let's get right into it. So first up, we like to mention conferences, of course. So Asia BSDCan, which is coming up here soon, but last year's conference, it looks like we got some more videos which have made its way online.
Yes, maybe that's why the paper notification is behind. They're still busy finishing off posting the videos from last year.
They're still converting videos.
But yeah, they have a...
That's entirely possible.
They have a bunch of interesting talks that went on at Asia BSDCan. So they have one here about developing customer premise equipment routers based on NetBSD. So these are the kind where your ISP or your telco provides you with the router. Rick Fleuter, who was actually at our interview with him was a pre-show today, but he did his talk about VXLANs and cloud-based networking with OpenBSD. That one's very interesting. Okay. I saw that in person. It was really good. Then they have another one here about adapting OS X for the enterprise and how that works. There's also Carve Your NetBSD. I forget what that one was about.
I imagine making some kind of NetBSD version for something. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't at that talk, so I'll have to go back and watch it now.
But yeah, and I guess we already mentioned last week they had the ones for about MPF and some other stuff up there. And it's quite a bit. And I think, I don't know if they posted that one yet, but there's also Matt Aarons gave a talk about OpenZFS.
Nice.
It's nice to see him in Tokyo.
So I'm a little confused by this one here. We have Colin Percival, everything you need to know about cryptography in 1 hour, but it says it's not from Asia BSDCan. Right, was this from another conference?
I'm not sure which conference this one was from.
Okay.
Looks like it was.
Cool. I'm sure it's fascinating.
Either way. He gave a talk somewhere else, and then also they have a link here to the older BSD talks.
Their BSD conferences YouTube channel.
So these are talks from other conferences. Some of them are a couple of years old, but if you haven't seen them, they're definitely worth watching. There's lots of good stuff there.
Definitely. Well, cool. Well, definitely going into the new year, you guys got some new videos to watch if you've managed to catch up from all the ones we've been highlighting the last few weeks. It's like, there's been a lot recently.
Most people have trouble keeping up just with our show coming up once a week, and then we just load them with videos. It's here, more videos.
Yeah. Videos. So it's like there's been like a big end-of-year video dump where like all the videos from the conferences of the previous years all show up.
I'm still waiting for them to drop the EuroBSDCon 2013 videos on us.
Oh, 2013.
Malta, right? Yeah.
Are those supposedly still happening?
I don't
know.
It's
been a while. Don't get your hopes up anyway. Well, cool. Okay. Well, next up in the news this week, OpenBSD has some PIE enhancements. Yes. So it looks like, of course, ASLR we've talked about in the past with the hardened BSD folks, and PIE are both great security features that OpenBSD's had enabled by default for quite a while now, both in the base system and ports, but they have one inherent problem. And that is they only work with dynamic libraries and binaries. So if you have any static binaries, they don't get the same treatment that your dynamic ones would. So we have an example here. Some things like shells, for example, and several other things in bin and SBin are typically statically linked. So maybe you're not getting that.
If you're in single user mode, your /USR might not be mounted, so you wouldn't have access to some of the libraries. So they statically build those kind of recovery tools. And
Okay, good.
In the cases of the static ones, it means you can predict how the memory is going to be laid out. And so if you know of a buffer overflow in it, then you can predict how it's going to react and make it do what you want it to do. Whereas with ASLR, it's supposed to be all randomized and position independent.
So you don't know where.
So that the attacker can't control where it's going to end up.
So those static binaries basically defeat the whole purpose of having this work. So it looks like, however, this has been fixed with a few related commits, and we have a link here you could take a look at. OpenBSD has fixed this by introducing static self-relocation. Very cool. So that looks like they're testing more and more CPU architectures and getting support for them as well. This isn't just for AMD 64 and i386. VAX users can rest easy now as well. Very cool.
And it's expected this feature will be available in OpenBSD 5.7, which will be released in May of 2015.
Or you can, of course, grab a current snapshot if you want to grab this on your box right now, and we have a link to that where you can grab those as well.
You missed the pun here. If you want to get a slice of the action, because it's pie. Would you like a slice of pie?
Right. That one went right over my head. I didn't even read that right. Nice.
When I saw the little emphasis marks, I was like, what? And then, I get it.
What? I get it now. Nice, TJ. Or did you write that?
TJ did.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, next up, the FreeBSD Foundation has released their semi-annual newsletter, which we have the link to here. You want to check that out at freebsdfoundation.org. And they do publish a huge newsletter about twice a year, detailing their funded projects and some of the community activities. And as always, this one does start with a letter from the president of the foundation. And this time it's about encouraging students and getting new developers involved with FreeBSD.
Yeah, it's really about lowering barriers to entry and kind of talks about his experience getting into computer science when he first started school and how if he had hit certain roadblocks, he might not have continued with it. But because things kind of just worked for him, that made a big difference for him. And it made it easy for him to learn and at least get those first couple of wins and get things working so that he would feel comfortable continuing and learning more, right? So enough of a challenge that he was feeling like he was growing, but not so much that he just hit a roadblock or an unnecessary misstep and so on. And he's kind of saying, we could do more of that with FreeBSD so that when people try out FreeBSD, there are fewer sharp edges and fewer things that they have to somehow know to do. There was an example discussion about that on the mailing list this morning. Is like, should we have the DHCP client turned on by default or not? And I'm like, it's like on my servers, I'd rather it not. But, I'm being a person that doesn't want that. I'm perfectly capable of changing that setting in rc.conf.
Sure.
Where I think for other people, it would make more sense to maybe have it on by default or even just make it an option in the installer. Well, yes, it is an option in the installer, I guess. The question is what to do with the pre-built virtual machine images. And I think for those, maybe DHCP on by default is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I just switched ours. Typically, we turn those on by default as well in VirtualBox images, and then we prompt during the install because some people want it on, some people don't. But cool. But it looks like in the article, he also has a fundraising update with a list of the sponsored projects. And they note about the donation meter on the website has changed from dollars to numbers of donors since they've pretty much blown away that goal already, as we talked about in a previous episode. So you can also read about summaries from all the BSD conferences that happened in 2014 and see a list of the upcoming ones next year, too. So start making your travel plans of conferences you'd like to attend.
But
and we also
just the list of projects that they actually funded that got completed was quite good as well. Like the new video console, that was actually worked out pretty good. The new audit disk stuff that Powell did for the FreeBSD cluster so that the logs will get spread out and do so encrypted and so on. More ARM support, the updated AES and OpenCrypto that we talked to John Mark about, the UEFI boot. There's still a couple of rough edges there, but it's definitely many machines can boot that couldn't before. Obviously lots of Capsicum stuff and then lots of research projects and just a ton of other stuff. I think the iSCSI stuff was also a big deal.
And they talk about doing FreeBSD virtual machine deployments. Let's see, some new 64-bit ARM architecture stuff. So that's
the other one is with having Glenn full-time as release engineer, we've got a lot more stuff like pre-built VirtualBox and VMware images and and just everything you need to just get started a lot easier.
Cool. We also have a section here about the FreeBSD journals progress, new staff member, and a testimonial from NetApp.
Yep. They also mentioned that they spent $100,000 on new hardware for the FreeBSD project's actual infrastructure. So the machines that build those packages, so that we can make sure that you get a fresh set of packages every week for all the different versions and so on. Making sure that there's at least 2 servers for every job, right?
Sure.
Before it was all kind of concentrated in California at ISC and Yahoo, but now on the East Coast at NYI, they have a complete copy of everything. So if one of the sites in the West Coast had to go down for a while or whatever, we wouldn't lose any services.
Nice. So if California slides off into the ocean, supposedly, like that.
Or something like that.
Well, everything will keep running. Good to know.
Because I still want to be able to commit to SVN if that happens.
That's right. Don't hang up on my commits, man.
And they also mentioned that they granted 18 travel grants to help developers travel to conferences for the important face-to-face interactions and so on. And so no excuse not to come to the conferences.
Cool. So this is a pretty long report, so definitely spend some time and go read through that if you can. Lots of neat stuff. Also, we want to mention this year in general was just really good for BSD. Both the FreeBSD and OpenBSD Foundations exceeded their goals, and the NetBSD Foundation came really close as well. So as this being today the last day of the year and going into 2015, consider donating to whichever BSD you'd like, and we have a link to all the different foundations where they accept donations for those. That can really make a difference and help fund some of the projects you need to see happen in these various BSDs.
Yeah, and a lot of times, as we just kind of saw with this, most of the donations that the foundations get come at the very end of the year. So donating early in the year, like in March or so, is kind of the period when they have not much going in, and it's nice to see, spread that out and even it out a little bit, so it's not just a big pile all at the end.
Definitely. Okay, cool. So our next story this week, we have an article about modernizing OpenSSH fingerprints. So if you've been a longtime SSH user, surely you've noticed that when you connect to a server for the first time, you'll usually get a fingerprint of the host's public key, and that's used to verify, of course, that you're talking to the same server that you intend to talk to. So up till now, key fingerprints have all been done in an MD5 hash and displayed as hex. But of course, MD5 being what it is, this can be a little bit problematic, especially for larger key types like RSA that give lots of wiggle room for collisions, as an attacker could potentially generate a fake host key that gives the same MD5 string as the one you wanted to connect to.
Especially with the elliptic curve ones, it requires less work to generate the key, so you could generate more keys per minute kind of thing.
Sure. So looks like we have a new change here, which replaces the default MD5 and hex with a base 64 encoded SHA-256 fingerprint.
So that'll make
that'll decrease the likeliness of that happening.
Change things a little bit. Instead of the the kind of hex string you got before, the first thing with making it base 64 means it'll actually be shorter, because instead of being limited to the 16 characters, you have 64 characters or 64 bits per each character. And so that this will make the string go from being like really long to a little bit shorter. And, why not use some uppercase letters in there? But it does mean they're case sensitive now, so make sure you consider that when you're looking at it.
Nice. So looks like there's a new fingerprint hash line you can add to your SSH config to force only using the new type. And we have a link here also, it looks like in OpenBSD, to a new option that requires users to authenticate with more than one public key. So you can really lock down, say, login access to your servers if you're not, and also useful maybe if you're not 100% confident in any single key type.
Right. So you can be like, you need an RSA key and ED25519.
Yeah.
That's
a really cool idea.
And I can see how that would be useful, just because you want to have both keys in case you have to go somewhere that isn't running a newer SSHD. But yes, requiring 2 different keys and possibly different types is actually quite interesting. Especially if you have like an SSH agent or something that deals with stuff, but then you have certain systems that need to be more secure and need to ask for an additional key.
Just to make sure.
You can.
So it looks like
various types of 2-factor. I like that. That's cool.
That is neat. So it looks like these should be hitting in the upcoming 6.8 release of OpenSSH. So, of course, we'll mention that in a future episode whenever that lands. Okay, so now before we go to our interview, we want to, of course, mention the first sponsor this week, which is IX Systems. And the URL for that is ixsystems.com/BSD Now. go ahead and go to that site. Let them know that we sent you. We'd appreciate that. But it looks like we have a new blog article that we can highlight this week. So which one is this on?
The case for TrueNAS, talking more about why you would pick a TrueNAS instead of like an EMC or a NetApp appliance. And in addition to what they wrote, they're also hosting a series of webinars on January 17th, 14th, and 21st, which those are Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. So you'll be able to watch that just before BSD Now. This series of them will be hosted by Matt Olander, who's
nice. So, Matt's always entertaining to listen to as well, so those should be fun. So yeah, you guys definitely want to put that on your calendar and schedule it. So again, he said the 7th, the 14th, and 21st. Looks like all at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So try and make some time to attend one of those and learn about what TrueNAS can do for you guys and some of the cool stuff it's capable of.
And I think probably during February there'll be a similar series of webinars about the features and power of ZFS.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Hosted by somebody else.
And we know ZFS is always popular when it's talked about, so that's a guaranteed winner right there. But of course, IX Systems, as we mentioned in this article, they're the parent company of TrueNAS, FreeNAS, PCBSD, and all things open source and storage and hardware. But of course, they do everything from big to small. If you're looking for a FreeNAS Mini, something you can throw under your desk and use it to store all your files, that would be the place to get those. All the way up to the massive systems we've detailed in the past, the 80-core box or the one with, 24 10 gig NICs.
And just ridiculous. Or, the one I bought with like 36 hard drives. Of course, they've shown off a better one. They had a Mega Store or something they called it that had 72 drives per server or something like that. Just ridiculous number of hard drives stuffed in there. And they actually have a little pull quote here in the case for the TrueNAS article. It says, when it comes to pricing, we have the best cost for performance/capacity. And he says, it's not uncommon for our customers to call us after seeing our quote and ask, where's the rest of the quote?
Yeah, right. Surely it's more.
Basically, when you're comparing the quote to something like a NetApp or an EMC, you're like, why is this like a fraction of the price of that? Because it's better? How does that work?
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Go get in touch with those guys. Let them hook you up with the solution you need for your business. Those guys will definitely ask the right questions and make sure you get specifically what you need at the cost that's reasonable as well. Okay, we're joined now by Dan Langille, who's with us to talk about conferences as well. It looks like BSDCan 2015. So thank you for being with us, Dan.
Yes.
Always glad to talk to you guys.
Yes.
Cool. So I don't think we've asked you this before, but how did you first get into BSD? Tell us the story. What led you to this point?
It was, I think it was either late 97 or early 98. And I was living in Wellington, New Zealand at the time. ADSL was just being rolled out in New Zealand. And prior to that, I was on dial-up. I knew I had to get a firewall. And I mentioned this to the chaps at New Zealand Fisheries. I think it was Ministry of Fisheries or something. And one guy there named Jay, he was big into BSD. And Jay not only gave me some CDs, but he gave me a computer. And I started installing it and got on IRC. I think it was FNet at the time, and started asking questions. And I just installed it and got it working. I didn't know anything about DHCP. I think that was the biggest problem at the time. But that's how I got started. And
cool.
I started writing notes. I had a notebook, and I started writing notes so that I knew what I had did and how I went wrong, so that when I went on the mailing list, I could tell people, this is what I've been doing. And I got sick of transcribing the notes from the notebook into my email. So I started keeping my notes on the computer. And then later on, when I got a website, I put those notes on the website, so it was easier to copy and paste into the emails. And eventually that became the FreeBSD diary.
I think that's how I first got introduced to Dan, was reading those and learning all kinds of useful information.
I remember getting my start. It was like every time you'd Google, it would be FreeBSD diary. It would come up with, oh, this is the fix to that particular question. So, and I'm still seeing that today when I Google things occasionally. I think when I did the router this last week, a matter of fact, some IPFW stuff came up from an article you'd written, Dan. So thank you for the diary. It's awesome. It's still very helpful today.
You're welcome. I haven't contributed to it in quite a while because I've actually been blogging at dan.langille.org, mostly because I now like WordPress, and the diary isn't WordPress, but eventually will be.
Cool.
Okay.
So I guess the next question we had was, how did BSDCan first get started, and what's the story behind that?
I don't think any of you were ever at the BSD cons in the States, were you? Did any of you go to them?
No.
Okay. So I went to a few of them, and I really enjoyed them because it was the first time that I actually was able to sit down and talk to other people that used BSD. And then those conferences stopped. And who was it? Usenix was running a very big BSD sort of side conference. Or you go to a Usenix conference and there'd be a lot of BSD. But it wasn't the same as having a BSD conference. So I was unemployed at the time, and I was living in Ottawa. And at the time, Ottawa had a very big Linux conference. And I was active, well, I went to the Linux conference, the Linux user group meetings that were there. And this guy went there as well. So I started taking him to lunch a few times and asked him, how are you running this conference and stuff like that. And some other local guys that I knew said, hey, listen, if this guy can do it, you can do it. So I went ahead and did it and organized it, and people came. I think the big advantage that I had is that the people that I were asking to come to the conference already knew me from my work on the FreeBSD diary, and by that time, Fresh Ports had started up as well. So I wasn't an unknown, and I had lots of spare time because I was unemployed. And that's how it got started in 2004. 2004? Yeah, that's right. That's right, 2004.
Cool.
So this year you're doing the conference a little bit later than usual. So what was the reason for the change?
Hotel rooms.
Okay.
Hotel rooms was one of the big issues, but it also conflicts with three major holidays: Mother's Day, Victoria Day, and Memorial Day, and it also conflicts with the Ottawa Marathon. I run two conferences. I run BSDCan in the first week and PGCon in the second week, and either way that you sort of stack them, they're going to interfere with one of those holidays. And 2014 is even worse because Memorial Day and Victoria Day are not on the same weekend. They're in consecutive weeks. So there was no open period at all in 2015 that would avoid one of those days. So people were saying, hey, let's move it later. And the only way to move it later was to move it into June. And we had about 2 to 3 months of discussion, and it was on various social media and mailing lists. But even today, I encountered someone who said, BSDCan is in June this year? What's going on? So we didn't get to everybody, and I'm sorry, but I think they'll be finding out soon now that they start looking at registration.
Sure.
But I think that should work out pretty good. Hopefully the weather will be even nicer for people.
I hope
Canada
so.
Look nice.
I hope so.
What, less rain? Oh, come on.
We didn't get too much rain last year, I don't think. Anyway. Oh, you didn't make it last year. That's why.
No, I didn't make it because the weather was so bad we couldn't even fly up there,
it
right?
wasn't the weather.
Either
was
that or United was just jerking us around.
No, it was a fire at the control tower at the airport, remember?
Yeah, and there was a different story to go along with it, depending on which person you asked at the terminal.
So anyway,
I remember hearing that you couldn't get there. I was disappointed.
Yes. Well, we got there. We made it to D.C., no problem. Me and Matt Olander, actually. And then they're like, okay, we canceled your flight tonight. There's one tomorrow. So we waited for that. Then they canceled that one. They're like, well, you can now go out Friday night, maybe. And if we can't get you on that one, we guarantee we'll get you there Saturday. And we're like, but the conference, that's the last day of the conference. Like, forget it. So anyway, but they did send us home with like no delay at all. So go figure. I don't know what the deal is there. Apparently Ottawa is difficult to get to or something, or United is just lame. Sorry, I'm not really shilling for United here today.
Anyway, so Dan, the call for papers for 2015 is out. You said the deadline is January 19th. So what kind of papers are you looking for?
They don't have to be technical papers. Traditionally, conferences tend to have very technical papers, getting into coding, stuff like that. Now, while the description says the talks must be of a technical nature, that's to get rid of the people who want to come along and say, hey, listen, we've got this great new product, please buy it. It's not sales. We want to hear about people who are using BSD in some aspect. It doesn't matter whether you're coding for it, whether you're using it, whether you're developing other products to run on BSD. If you're using BSD, chances are someone else wants to hear about what you're doing. It's a fairly easy process to get a talk accepted. Just submit it and have a good idea of what you're going to say. And chances are, if nobody's said it before, then someone will want to hear it.
Well,
yes,
that's cool.
Something I always appreciated about BSDCan was it usually had a strong sysadmin track. Where me being not a programmer, it's like you start talking about C and it goes over my head. But if you want to talk about, making a server do this or backups of that or orchestration and Puppet or whatever type things like that, that was always the stuff that interests me. And BSDCan always had lots of that, and I really like that.
Cool. So how does it work deciding which talks are going to appear at the conference? Who decides that, or is there any community involvement with how that works?
We have this big hat. No, seriously.
You do a sorting hat?
Yeah, we put all the talks into a hat. There is a program committee of about half a dozen people, and they review the talks, they vote on them, they give comments. If there's a particular talk that gets contentious, we discuss it, but basically we rank them, and then at the end the top end talks get selected, and that's what goes on the list. Some of the people have been around for ages, some of them are relatively new, but we have a low turnover rate. We try not to change them too often, mostly because it's good to have consistency in the criteria for the talks.
Cool. So for EuroBSDCon, they now have a committee. Their program committee has members from each of the different projects, like FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD. Do you have kind of something similar to make sure there's fair representation of each of the BSDs, or?
There's no policy that says that yes, we've got to have people from each of the projects, but that's the way it is. We've got people from FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD. We've got Bob Beck. We've got George Neville-Neal, Michael Lucas, and David Maxwell to sort of round out the individual projects. We've also got Drew Levine and Greg Lay. I think I've mentioned everyone, and I'm on there too, but I tend not to do a lot of the voting. I tend to read through the talks and say, yeah, I want to hear this one, I want to hear this one. But most of the debating goes on with the other members of the program committee. I tend to let them decide.
Sure. Cool. So for aside from the date change this year, is there any other special plans for this year that you can share with us?
I don't know if this one is going to go through, but at the end of last year, I looked into the Diefenbunker, which is a World War II or a Cold War era underground bunker, which runs tours. And we can rent it out and go and have dinner there. And they have enough room for all 250 of us. We just get catering to come in and we'll have dinner there. But the problem I have with that is getting people to commit to say, yes, I'm going to come. Didn't EuroBSDCon in Malta, didn't they have it so that you would sign up for the dinners separately, and so they had a good head count in advance?
It was part of the registration process. You could pay the extra $20 for dinner for each night or whatever.
I think that's what we're going to have to do for this, and that'll give us enough of an idea to see how many people are keen enough to go, and then we'll start looking at booking it. Otherwise, it's a big risky thing. It could turn out that nobody wants to go. So we're not going to make it inclusive in the cost because it's quite a different cost.
Right. And yeah, I can kind of see both ways. Those dinners were quite nice in Malta, but at the same time, it also meant there was like no hacker lounge. and that's one of my favorite parts of BSDCan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'd arrange it so that we're not gone for 6 hours. The place is only about a 45-minute drive from downtown, so we'd head out there, have dinner. We'd also be able to have tours of the place, which is actually very interesting. The most interesting part of the tour, believe it or not, for me, was the escape hatch. If the tunnel gets blown in and you can't get out through the tunnel, they have at least one escape hatch. And how do you get out from underground? Basically, you have this tunnel, this ladder that leads up, and there's this hatch. But from the hatch to the ground is all filled with gravel. And so there's this big grate at the bottom of the hatch into which all the gravel will fall when you open up the hatch.
Interesting.
You don't want to open up that hatch because there's going to be all this gravel and dust, and some people have done it accidentally and things like that. But it's these little things that you would never think about when you think of an underground bunker. And if that's the most interesting thing, imagine what the other things that are there that you can see. They have some equipment, and you can see the rooms, and they have some of the old material in it. And I really liked it. I know that many people from BSDCan in previous years have gone on private tours there, but this should be getting the whole group to go.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I'd love to see that.
Sounds like a nice dinner too. So.
I thought you were going to say the escape hatch was a spare shovel laying next to the door or something, but yeah.
That's cool. So what would you say is the hardest part of running a conference?
Getting everyone to submit early.
And register early, eh?
No. Everyone likes to submit their talk. You know, we have a 2 months? December 19th, No, we opened December 1st to January 19th. So what's that? 6, 8 weeks? 6, 7 weeks? But everyone submits in late January. There's about very few talks come in. You know, someone will submit the very first day or two.
Right.
And then it's quiet. It's really quiet. I should do a graph.
I think that was my talk this year, by the way.
It's a hockey stick. It goes like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. And all of a sudden it ramps really up at the end, which is good. It just means that we can't sort of preview, we can't start reviewing until they're all in. Yeah.
Basically. And I think that's probably what happened with AsiaBSDCon. They've pushed back the date when they tell us which talks are accepted because I think they all of them came in right at the last minute and they had no time to review them yet.
Yep. But seriously, the hardest part is reviewing the talks. We spend a lot of time reviewing the talks. We have 4 weeks to do it, and the first 3 weeks is just reviewing and talking and debating the talks, and then the last week it is sort of tidying up loose ends. But seriously, we need that 4 weeks. We could have given ourselves more time this year because we had the same opening and closing dates, but the conference is a few weeks later. But we didn't want to change that part of it, basically because the earlier we get this done, the better.
Yeah,
sure.
It helps with travel plans and all that kind of stuff. So I guess that leads to the next question. What's the most rewarding part of doing the conference?
Seeing all the happy people.
Yeah.
The first time I ran BSDCan, I was so nervous about, making sure that everyone got there, and it was all sort of like, is this the right way to do it, or should we do it this way or do it that way? A lot of unknowns. But at the end, the applause the first year was just so overwhelming. It just sort of, okay, this is okay, this is good. It's the satisfaction of knowing that everyone has come along and had a good time and enjoyed it. And the most oft mentioned complaint is, I want to go to all 3 talks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you have just one track?
Because the conference would have to be a week long.
It would be a week long.
I don't know if I could stay up till 3 a.m. in the Hacker Lounge for an entire week. The 4 days is more than enough.
So Dan, what has been the strangest talk you've ever had at the conference, whether it made the cut or not?
I know, not so much a strange talk, but I can't think of anything that we rejected because it was too outlandish. I would. We've got all the records. We could go back and look at that, and maybe some of the committee members might remember something. But I remember one talk where one of the things discussed during the talk was the necessity of firearms in order to do their job.
Interesting. Which talk was that? Do you recall?
This is an ISP up in northern Canada.
Oh, okay.
And so you had satellite dishes that you had to go out and knock the snow off of. And if you were doing that, you were at risk of polar bears.
Oh, wow.
So you know, while you were doing that, I remember the guy that gave the talk. I can't recall his name right now, and I'm sure he'll watch this, but it was a great talk. It was interesting talking about the problems of having ISP support in remote locations, and these are remote locations.
I think it was Dwayne something?
Yes. Dwayne Hart?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Or is Dwayne Hart the chap that lives in Newfoundland?
He lives in Newfoundland, but he managed the remote installations because he had two servers with jails. And that was a really good talk. The video of it is up from, that was 2013, I think.
Was he the one where they mentioned they had to run heaters in the server room to keep it warm enough?
Yes, that was
okay. That's right.
Because he had redundancy with jails and stuff, and they were older, so they didn't have ZFS yet, but he was going to look at changing that.
Dwayne works at Memorial University in Newfoundland now, I think. Yeah.
But he had been doing that stuff up north, and they gave a great talk about it. That was very interesting. I feel spoiled doing everything I have to do with IPMI from home. Right.
So that's nothing very weird or out there, but that's the only one that I can recall recently.
Yeah. Cool. So what have you been up to lately?
I've been playing around with Ansible and ZFS and jails, and I've been spending a lot of time moving services from my old servers onto this new server, and really enjoying how easy it is to put something into a jail with Ansible, and they say, oh, no, I don't want it there on that server now. I want it over on this server, and you just change, and it goes over there. I really like that.
In that case, it's just creating a new jail with the config on the other server, or is it actually moving the jail?
I haven't tried like copy paste, put the jail over there, but yeah, redeploying is what I'm concentrating on now, and all of this stuff combined with package and Poudre is making things so much easier. I can upgrade all 60 or 70 jails in an evening, whereas all of us here know what it was like to do a build world on a remote host, or rebuild all our packages on a remote host, and we get dependency problems and stuff like that. Now we can upgrade all the packages on one server in a few minutes, and it just works. It's wonderful.
Well, I remember even when I give my Puppet talk in 2013 at BSDCan. At that point, I think I was still building packages from source. So my Puppet would actually just download the ports tree and build the apps, and it took about 45 minutes. It didn't seem that bad. But then I switched it to using package from my own repo that I built with Poudre, and it takes 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And most of that's just downloading all the packages.
Some of the servers I'm running have, well, my Poudre instance takes about 550 packages to build. So that takes about 45 minutes because it's building some big stuff like OpenVPN and Postgres, MySQL. Some of that has dependencies which take ages.
I think I build almost every one of the 300 packages I need in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the run. And then the rest of the 45 plus minutes is OpenJDK.
All right.
Java.
Cool. Okay, Dan, well, as we wrap up, you have anything else you want to mention? We open the floor.
Do you remember talking about Elk? Elasticsearch and this little...
Oh, yes, we mentioned it on the show.
Stuff?
Yes.
Because of you guys, I implemented this here. I've got log stash forwarding going from all my, well, not all of the servers yet, but for most of my servers, all the log stashes are coming into these servers sitting here behind me and drawing pretty graphs and stuff like that. And that is actually reducing the number of logs that I have to look at and worry about, because they're now all in this one little dashboard. And I can see that, oh yes, the script kiddies were hitting last night, weren't they? Look at all the number of these things over here.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And once I get all the logging in, my next task on the jails will be fail to ban on the host, and all the it's observing all the jails and knocking things out that way. I think that should be really interesting. You should drop the number of script kiddie stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I might have to switch to something like that, because until now I've been using deny host, the Python script, in the jails, because it would use the TCP wrappers to be able to block stuff from SSH. But it looks like newer versions of OpenSSH are looking at getting rid of TCP wrappers. And it might just, it's more efficient to just do it once on the host and block it with IPFW.
Fail to ban works quite well on the host. That's what I do for my mail servers. We have a web jail and mail jail and whatnot. And it just lives on the host, peeks into the jail for the logs, and does its banning out there. So the benefit is I ban you from all the jails and all the services at the same time.
That's what I love about jails and hosts, is that in the jail, you don't know you're in a jail unless you look at the right place. But when you're on a host, you can look into every single jail, grab the logs and do what you need, and then just you're gone.
A PHK said that when we interviewed him. It's kind of like that special two-way glass they have in like a police station, right in the interview room, like you see on TV. It's like you can look in and see what's going on, but the person inside can't see that you're there. And
I owe PHK, amongst many other people, several beer.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being on with us, Dan. This has been a pleasure, and I know we're both planning on going to BSDCan. Looking forward to seeing you there this year.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, guys. See you in June.
Okay, we're going to head into the news roundup, but before we do, we want to mention the other sponsor this week, which of course is Tarsnap, and that URL is tarsnap.com/BSD Now. So come on, guys, it's just about 2015. You need to be doing some kind of backups.
Yes.
And if you're going to be doing them, do them offsite and do them securely, where you don't have to trust the remote end. So Tarsnap is going to be the thing you're going to want to take a look at for that. So what do you want to tell us about that today, Alan?
You know, everybody's New Year's resolution should be backing their stuff up safely and securely. And so the answer is Tarsnap.
Definitely. Of course, they have clients for just about everything under the sun up there. So even if you need a Windows client, you can grab that. They have something compiled with Cygwin.
I saw Michael Lucas was actually working on compiling the source code on Windows himself to get his verified binary on Windows.
Nice.
Because he's working on the Tarsnap mastery book. So looking forward to seeing that.
Okay. Definitely. Well, very cool. So again, tarsnap.com/BSD Now, and let them know we sent you. Go ahead and get set up with an account. Put a couple bucks in. That should last you a while. If you're not backing up a lot, it's pay as you go. Okay, so news roundup. So what's up this week? I guess this is a well-timed announcement.
Yes, they have,
but we have introducing entimed, a new NTP daemon. So what is this exactly, Alan?
So PHK was approached actually by the Linux Foundation because he's a well-known time nut, including running his own high-level NTP server based off of the GPS or something, to look at building a new time daemon. So this would be a replacement for NTPD. Specifically, NTPD has a lot of extra features and things that have grown onto it, and the idea of entimed is just to be simple and just do the one thing you want to run on every one of your servers, which is keep the time correct. You know, NTPD is kind of designed to be a whole time server and has all this extra stuff you don't need. And after looking at it, PHK decided it would be less work to build a new client from scratch than to try to fix the old one.
Nice.
So this is work being sponsored by the Linux Foundation to build a new NTP daemon. In particular, it will be supported by the Network Time Foundation, which is the people that currently maintain NTPD. So it has all the support from them as well.
Okay. Very cool. And of course, there's a preview version of it you can grab right now in the FreeBSD ports tree under net entimed. Also, we have the links to GitHub, so if you want to take a look at the source. And PHK also has some blog entries about the project, and we have a link to that. So if you want to read about how it's coming along, that's a great place to get started.
It started back, the Linux Foundation started the project, or started looking at it around the time of Heartbleed, because they want to make sure that, we don't have the same problem there. And, we'd already had quite a few problems with NTPD being used for those reflection denial of service attacks. And then, the news of entimed kind of got hyped up recently because of another critical flaw that could lead to code execution on the NTP daemon. So,
yeah, that was a week ago or so.
PHK mentions that it's not production quality yet, although they expect to have their first production quality release in the first quarter of 2015.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we may have to get an interview with him again in the future to talk about that, actually.
Yes. He said
an update on what's different and how it works.
Hopefully maybe sometime in January or February we'll be able to nail down PHK and talk to him more about it. It says right now it's just an entimed client, so it can synchronize the system clock from some set of NTP servers. If this becomes popular, it's adding support for making slave servers, reference clocks, and possibly support for the precision time protocol, which NTPD is kind of about keeping your clock right to like the second or maybe a little bit more, whereas precision time D is about keeping the clocks on all the machines on your LAN exactly synchronized to like the microsecond. So possibly that'll be a feature that could grow onto this if people are interested. But the overall goal is the same as most free open source projects: is simplicity, quality, security, etc. And you'd like to stick closely to those. In particular, like currently NTPD is over 300,000 lines, and that's a lot to try to go through, and it would be less work to just write the new one.
Well, cool. Well, next up, we have an OpenBSD maintained project list. So there's recently been an interesting read on the miscellaneous mailing list asking about some of the different projects started by various OpenBSD members. So the initial list had some marks for which software had portable versions to other operating systems, for example, OpenSSH being one of the more popular ones. But a developer's gone through and compiled a new list from all the other replies to a thread that has a nice organized web page now. So, of course, if you've been around a while, you're probably familiar with some of them, like OpenSSH, OpenSMTPD, OpenNTPD, and most recently, of course, LibreSSL. But there's quite a lot more. So, any other ones particular?
Break it down to projects started from scratch as part of OpenBSD, like OpenBGPD, NTPD, RelayD, their new HTTP daemon, the OpenSMTPD, OpenID, etc. Then projects that started as OpenBSD forking non-OpenBSD code, like OpenSSH and LibreSSL. And then they also have projects that started outside of OpenBSD, but then kind of got adopted by OpenBSD, are now officially maintained by them, including tmux and mandoc. And then they have things that are just parts of OpenBSD, like Anon CVS, PF, SpamD, their CensorD, CARP is a popular one, OSPFD, HostAPD, lots and lots of little tools that are all started as part of OpenBSD. They have another started as OpenBSD fork of non-OpenBSD code. They have sysmerge, stuff that's maintained as part of OpenBSD now, like the whole Yellow Pages service, like YPBind, YPset, YPCat, etc. MG, which is their clone of Emacs or something, isn't it? I forget. Some editor.
And don't forget DH client, of course. That's a big one.
And they're talking about libraries that started as part of OpenBSD, like strl copy and strl cat, stir to num, realloc array and all that kind of fun stuff. The time safe mem copy and stuff like that. And then also projects maintained by OpenBSD developers, but outside of OpenBSD include sudo, FDM, portroach, etc.
Cool. Well, that's definitely an interesting read. This page is also a pretty cool history lesson for BSD in general. FreeBSD and others have ported some things over, and of course a couple OpenBSD tools are born of forks from FreeBSD tools, such as MergeMaster, Package Tools, Port Scout. So it's a neat read to see that and see where all these different things came from and where they've ended up.
Yep.
Okay, so next up in the roundup, monitoring network traffic with FreeBSD, and we have a link here to FreeBSD forums. But if you've ever been curious about monitoring the network on traffic on your FreeBSD box, this post may be the exact thing you need to take a look at. It's going to show you how to combine NetFlow, NFDump, and NFSend's suite of tools to get some pretty detailed network stats. And of course, what good are stats without putting them in a fancy web page? So we'll talk about how to do that as well. So this is especially useful for finding out what's going on at a certain point in time. For example, if you had a large traffic spike and you want to pinpoint on that and see exactly what was happening then. So we also want to thank one of our listeners who wrote this guide and then sent the link. And thank you. This is quite excellent. These are always fun things to pass along.
Yeah. So they talk about the different parts that make up NetFlow. They have the flow exporter, which is the device that the network traffic is going through will record the source and destination of the traffic and export those as flow records out to the collector. And then you have the collector that will receive those flow records and store them for future analysis. Specifically, on Cisco-type devices like switches and routers, they don't really have any storage, so they have to send the records over the network to someone else to write them down. So then they have the NF-CAPD to record that stuff. And then you have to analyze the dumps once you have them. That's where the NF dump and NF sends come in, so you can actually do it. And it talks about how to set that up on your FreeBSD machine, and then how to build all the turn it into something useful.
Nice. Well, this definitely looks interesting. I may have to set this up on my router.
Yeah, I was just thinking that you have that new router, and be interesting to watch what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good excuse to set that up. I've done some poking around with IPFW logs and stuff, but this would be more fun. So, very cool. Okay, next up in the run through this week, we have trapping spammers with SpamD. Also something else I should play with. This is neat. But there's a blog post we want to highlight about OpenBSD SpamD, which is a spam email deferral daemon, and how you can use it for your mail. So have you used this, Alan? How exactly does this work?
I've not used this, but I've used the technique before. So basically it employs what's called gray listing. When an email gets sent to you and it's from someone you don't know, the mail server will basically temporarily reject the email. The mail server saying, "I'm too busy right now. Could you come back in a couple minutes?" Legitimate emails will try again in a couple of minutes. Most spammers will just move on and send it to somebody else. Because they, any kind of failure, I don't feel like coming back and pounding on these addresses.
I'm on to the next target.
I'm pretty sure this address is probably not real. So yeah, and so with gray listing, the downside is that it means you get your email 20 minutes late instead of immediately. But once it's someone that you're used to communicating with, they'll be whitelisted and they get through anyway. But it allows it rejects most of the spam, and that helps a lot.
Very cool. So this post also looks like it shows how you can combine it with PF and some other tools, so you can have a pretty fancy mail setup. And of course, SpamD is in the OpenBSD base system, and we also have links to fresh ports where you can find it in FreeBSD port tree, or it's in NetBSD with package source as well. So definitely several ways to grab it.
They have another technique here, what they call stuttered. So when it's an untrusted host, it will send the regular header and stuff, the messages back and forth at the beginning of the conversation about sending the email, one character at a time. If it's a spammer, they're probably going to be like, "All right, we've been at this for 15 seconds, I give up." Whereas a real mail server won't. And so you don't get the delay from gray listing of 15 minutes for the first retry to resend the mail. The stuttering just means that maybe it takes 60 seconds. Because you're just talking really slow to aggravate the spammer and make them go away, but someone that legitimately actually
make them waste cycles.
But they'll give up. Whereas someone that legitimately wants to send you an email will put up with stuttering for 60 seconds and then send you your email.
Oh, very nice. And also, we have a link here. You may want to go back and listen to episode 68 of BSD Talk, where Will talks to Bob Beck about SpamD as well. So that may be of interest if you find the whole
I didn't know Bob was working
listing and the stuttering methods interesting. Okay, first up in the feedback this week, we got Sean asking about SSL and Jelly. He said, "I have some more feedback questions for the show. I have a FreeBSD 10.1 stable server running Apache 2.4.10 and OpenSSL 1.01J. After running an SSL Labs test against my server, it said the following: Next protocol negotiation, or NPN, equals no. So I read up about this, and it's related to SPDY. In order to install and enable SPDY on an Apache 2.4 server, you also need to enable the NPM extension on this server. I've had to look online for how to do this on a FreeBSD server, but I came up empty-handed. So question number one, do you know how I can install? or configure this on my server? Go ahead, Alan.
I didn't even know that Apache supported SPDY yet.
Oh, maybe that's the reason why there's no Docker.
Yeah, but he says there's an npm extension. So he didn't mention if he was using the port or the package. When you do make config in the Apache port, there are many, many options. I don't know if npm is one of those or not.
I'm looking right now. He said Apache 2.4 specifically, yes. So
is there one for SPDY or npm, or both possibly?
I don't see SPDY. How about npm?
So that might be something that hasn't been added to the port yet, and the maintainer just didn't realize that that was an option or that anybody would want it. Now, I wouldn't say that on your SSL labs that's one of the lines to worry about. It just means you don't support SPDY, but that's not a very popular protocol. It's something Google does, but it's really not caught on anywhere else. It was a candidate for HTTP 2.0, but I doubt it's what's going to actually make it. So I just wouldn't worry about it. But if you are interested in doing it anyway, you might need to get in touch with the Apache port maintainer and get that extra option in there.
Yeah, I don't see those options in
or
in
if you're interested,
the
Porter's Handbook will tell you how to add new options to the list, and you could send a patch in as a PR.
Yes.
And they'll review that and get that into the port so that will be an option.
Cool.
If it's just an extension in a module, it might be possible to actually have it as a separate port so that you can get a package of it. So you can just say, add this module to my existing Apache. But the npm extension probably, but I don't know. I imagine the core HTTPD would have to be compiled with SPDY support for that to work. I'm not. I haven't used Apache in a while now because I do everything with Nginx.
Does Nginx do that?
Nginx has SPDY as an option when you compile it. I don't think it's on by default, though.
Okay.
So then his second question is there any way when booting FreeBSD to cause it to pause or stop the scrolling of the text on the screen because it's bearing my Geli prompt? Yeah, we wish there was a way to do that. I've looked at it. It's like, can we make it just bright red or something, or what?
Or just use PCBSD because we'll prompt you at the bootloader and not bug you with that second prompt. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Right?
So Chris sorted the problem on PCBSD. You enter it at the Geli or at the grub prompt. In it, that actually enables two things. A, it gets rid of the problem of the password prompt getting buried, and it also solves with some code Colin Percival wrote. It means that if you have 4 disks with the same password, you don't have to enter the password 4 times. Just once will do. And then
assuming you use the same key for all of them.
And then with the stuff Chris did, he can boot without having to have an unencrypted partition to load the kernel from to get the Geli module in the first place, because he's got a Geli module for grub. He's all fancy,
very cool
over there.
I know, right? Sorry.
So technically, early on in the boot process, you can drop to the bootloader and set a sysctl, right? And that
you can export a kernel environment variable, which will get read with that.
It might be possible to add something to the BSD menu that comes up to offer you the option to enter your password then. But
only problem is, though, what if you fat finger it? Like, I don't think it's going to check to see if that's correct until you get to the boot up.
And then, the way Colin did that, I think, using his cache thing, is that counts as your 0th try, so you'd still get your regular 3 tries after that.
That's true.
So I'm wondering if we could actually make the BSD menu detect that you have, Geli enabled or whatever, and then prompt you for the password at that point right away.
Sure. I'm sure there's be some way to do it.
I'm gonna have to look at that
figuring it out fourth.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll just have to enlist one of the 3 people on the planet that can do that to help me out. Luckily, I know all 3 of them, so maybe I can get some help.
Nice.
So I'm gonna look at that one because it's weird that I don't use Geli though. It's not really my thing. Anyway, so we have next question.
Okay. Next question is from Brandon asking about VGA pass-through. He said, I've heard about Arch Linux, Fedora, Ubuntu, OpenSUSE being able to do VGA pass-through to have a second GPU run in Windows, allowing me to play games in Windows without having to dual boot at the expense of more CPU overhead to, of course, run both operating systems. I'm wondering if PCBSD or if any BSD really could do something similar with Beehive.
Well, in particular, it's not Arch or Fedora or Ubuntu or OpenSUSE that have that feature. It would be whatever virtualization system they're using, which I'm guessing is the KVM one.
Possibly,
Beehive can't do this because it 2 reasons. A, it can't run Windows, and B, because it doesn't have a BIOS, when you pass through a video card, it doesn't get initialized, and so nothing happens. I I don't think.
Can VirtualBox do this?
No,
as far
if
as you know?
VirtualBox has support for hardware pass-through. If it did, then yes, that would be doable. In general, the thing you would have to do is there's some stuff in the Beehive documentation on how to cause certain devices not to be picked up by FreeBSD. So you'd say the device that lives at this address, make FreeBSD ignore it so that then you can pass it through. But those ones I'm pretty sure are using KVM, and so no. But if VirtualBox can do it, then yes. Eventually, Beehive will be able to do
the
it.
Google search seems to indicate it has some level of support for that. There's some blog posts and articles about how to do it, like PCI pass-through and stuff.
So yeah, I might have to try that just for fun.
I will. We have a guy who's been doing a lot of game testing in PCBSD recently with Wine and stuff, and this is something I actually told him this last week to take a look at too. Maybe doing some VirtualBox stuff as well, so we can bypass Wine.
I know that Sean Webb from HardenedBSD managed to pass through his unsupported wireless. So on his laptop, he has like a Broadcom wireless card or whatever, and so he used Beehive to hardware pass through that into the Beehive, where he ran Linux, got the Wi-Fi driver, and then connected over the host to virtual machine bridge, so his FreeBSD machine as the host can use the VM to get to the internet over the Wi-Fi. So hardware pass-through is a thing for Beehive. It's just because it doesn't have a BIOS, it's hard to do VGA, and because it doesn't have Windows support, it wouldn't work in this case. But
maybe eventually,
eventually that is something that they want to be able to do. In the meantime, you might want to try it out with VirtualBox, because I'm interested in that as well. So if you get it working, let us know.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some posts indicating that, I guess a year or two ago, they added some initial support for that. So we'll just have to take a look and see if that works. I have no idea. Okay, let's see. Next up is from Anders asking about new wireless access point. He says, firstly, thank you so much for an excellent show that you guys put out every week. Well, you're welcome. On behalf of TJ as well, who does a lot of the work for this. Thank you. He said, I genuinely look forward to every new episode that you guys publish. I travel a lot for work. He says, I work in the consulting business, and I always put on BSD Now as my podcast when I return to Sydney after a long work week. Please keep up the good work. I have a question for you, which I hope you might be able to address as part of the show. I'd like to build a BSD-based access point for my apartment. Combined ADSL2 plus Wi-Fi routers are very common in Australia, but unfortunately, due to the DSL chip being soldered onto the board of the routers, it's very difficult to load modified firmware onto broadband routers without rendering the DSL chip unusable. He said, instead, I've chosen to build my own access point, which will then route traffic to my Netgear router. He said, I have the following requirements. Number one, it needs to be low power, discrete, no fans. In other words, not a AMD64-based system with fans. It needs to run BSD and have SSH-based access, such as FreeBSD or OpenBSD preferably. It needs to run PF. It needs to be relatively cheap, so about $100 US. It needs to service my home network, which consists of 2 laptops, a workstation, and 4 mobile devices simultaneously without any hiccups. He said, I've tinkered with the idea of using a Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone Black as they fit the low power plus discrete bill, but I'm not sure if they will run free or OpenBSD though. Also, none of these boards come with Wi-Fi capability at all, so I need, of course, to add a USB Wi-Fi NIC that supports access point mode with sufficient power. Otherwise, it can't reach many of the devices outside the bedroom. As for a USB Wi-Fi NIC, I've heard that Cisco Linksys AE1000 devices are okay and supported by FreeBSD, and he has a link to the blog article where this is talked about, but I haven't seen any posts on the mailing list confirming that this works. His question is, do you think this above approach sounds reasonable, and what OS hardware configuration would you recommend?
Well, so yes, the Raspberry Pi and BeagleBone Black are both supported by FreeBSD and I think OpenBSD. I'm sure the BeagleBone is OpenBSD. I'm pretty sure the Raspberry Pi as well. The problems they have are that even the onboard Ethernet port is USB and limited to like 60 megabits about. And at that point, it's like using all the CPU. So probably, depending on the speed of your internet connection, that might not be enough. Although with ADSL, he's probably okay there. For myself, honestly, I have a regular, like, $40 Netgear wireless access point that I disabled all the router features on it, like it doesn't turn the DHCP off, and so you associate to it for the wireless, and then it uses my real FreeBSD machine as its default gateway, and that's where the DHCP lives and all that stuff. And then I swapped out the Netgear for a little Japanese thing. That does what, because it did wireless N as well that way.
Sure.
So that's what I'd been
But
doing.
it sounds like he can't pull out his router. Like
Right,
that's
yeah.
the combined ADSL.
Yeah, I had something like that, and I had them. The ISP could change it to be in pass-through mode. Basically, I told them I had a fancy Cisco router because that's something they understood. They didn't understand what BSD was, but I told them I had a fancy Cisco router, and they're like, okay,
Very
so
fancy.
so they turned the combined modem router Wi-Fi thingy into pass-through mode, where it wouldn't get an IP address of its own. It would give the real public IP address to my FreeBSD machine, and then I did everything from there. But then you have this box that's really just in the way. As far as what you're talking about, there are x86 systems that will
Fanless.
I don't know about fanless, but you can get quiet fans. But yeah, for under $100, it's pretty hard to do all of that. Wireless is just icky. Everybody wants it, but yeah, I try to avoid it when I can, honestly. I don't have a good solution for this.
No, I'm using the Asus, the old router, as the wireless access point at this point. But then, of course, the FreeBSD box is just an old AMD dual core I had laying around with a very quiet fan. So it's right here underneath my desk, actually. I don't even hear it.
Like something like one of those NUCs that I have that we're using for the show right now is very quiet. The problem with those ones is that they're like $400. But they have
it's not going to hit the $100 mark.
They have high-end like i3 or i5 processors in them. They're whole systems.
Sure.
But
TJ's telling us too, Raspberry Pi is not supported by OpenBSD.
I didn't know that.
Just a heads up.
There are official Raspberry Pi images for FreeBSD. And what other types do they have?
What's that other one? The Banana Pi or something that came out that's got a lot more power or something? It's dual core.
Yeah. I'm just going to pull that up right here.
Does FreeBSD work on that yet? Because that may give you enough overhead. If you said you can do 60 megabits on the Pi, maybe you can do 120 or something.
Support BeagleBone, Panda board, Raspberry Pi B, and the Z board. Yeah, so BeagleBone, Panda board, Raspberry Pi, Wand board, and Z board are the ones that are supported. Oh, the Wand board image looks really old, so maybe that's not still supported. But yeah, they do have the Z board, Raspberry Pi, Panda board, and BeagleBone.
Okay. Well, hopefully one of those will be something you can get down there in Australia.
Yeah.
And will fit in your budget, and we'll do what you need to do.
Wi-Fi. I don't know which devices are supported. I just know that none of them will probably be very good.
Well, if the blog article said the Linksys AE1000 worked in access point mode, then I would assume that hasn't changed or gone away.
Yeah, so that might work. I don't know how.
Just take a look at the current man page for it, I guess, and see if it all looks kosher there on like 10.1 or something.
Some of the problems with the USB ones is sometimes Cisco will change the chip inside without changing the model number, and then the one you get isn't the same as the one the other guy bought, and even though they both say the same thing on the box. So yeah. Sorry, don't know what to tell you.
Okay, well, then I guess we will move on. So David writes in asking about firmware. He said, my primary laptop at present is an HP DV6 2150 US with a Broadcom wireless hardware. I'm fairly certain this is supported by the B43 Linux blob, but it appears that PCBSD, and therefore I'm assuming FreeBSD, doesn't support this hardware at the moment. He said, I'd rather be using PCBSD on this laptop since in all respects, but networking, BSD seems to be a far better choice for this hardware. Is there a way I can build or obtain firmware for this device and load it into the kernel? That's icky.
Yeah, not really.
It's Broadcom.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no other backdoor way to. I don't even think the NDIS gen works anymore at this point.
I don't think works on 10. Or the NDIS thing might work if you can get Windows XP drivers for the wireless. But if it's new enough that they don't still make Windows XP drivers, then NDIS stuff doesn't work. And that's why I think the plan is for NDIS to go away for FreeBSD 11 because it won't be possible to use it anymore.
Honestly, when we see a chip like this, okay, so Broadcom's not supported, and I'm assuming won't be for the foreseeable future because it's a binary blob and not open source. Some of the easiest things we've seen is just yanking it out.
Yeah,
if the bottom of your laptop has the access port where you can pop it open, yank that Broadcom chip out, just go buy another card.
Usually
they're pretty inexpensive.
They're mini PCI devices. The Intel 6205, the Centrino N6205 is what I have in my laptop. It works. you can buy the chips at most computer stores for $18 to $25.
Oh yeah, that's cheap.
And yeah, you just pop it out, slap that in, and problem solved.
Yeah,
it's
so
not the best solution.
I think you'd probably thank yourself later. You'd probably save yourself more than $18 worth of time and frustration dealing with the Broadcom stuff, trying to get it to work.
You just got to make sure you grab one. If you look at the man page for IWN, and make sure you get one of the ones that's on the list there, because there are some Intels that aren't supported. Some of the newer ones, the 7250 or something like that. But the 6205 is what I have, and it works very nicely.
Okay, cool. Okay, last question for the week from Kyle, asking about a workstation GPU. He says, "Good morning, BSD Now folks. I hope you both had a good Christmas and looking forward to New Year." Wow, I know we did. Did you have a good Christmas, Alan?
I don't know if you can kind of see it in the background there, but I have a new lamp made out of Tetris pieces, and you can move it around, and it's awesome.
Nice. I got a new Star Wars Lego in the back I got to put together with my kids to put up on my shelf of awesomeness. So, yeah, definitely had a good Christmas. He said, if I could trouble you at it for a few minutes of your time to answer something trivial, I'd greatly appreciate it. He said, I'm currently planning on building a new FreeBSD workstation, and in my research for compatible parts, he ran across Alan's post, and then he has the link to New York City Bug there.
Yeah, they have they collect the D messages from machines, and I posted the one from my newest workstation.
Yep. He said, now then, I've worked with the X9 Supermicro motherboard series with FreeBSD, and everything works like a charm. The trouble I'm running into, however, is the graphics card used. I played with getting the NVIDIA drivers working in FreeBSD 9 and up that stable branch, but I'm a bit out of date on newer graphics cards with FreeBSD. As the D message indicates, Alan's system has an NVIDIA from what I believe to be the GTX 560 series. Is that correct, if you recall? Okay. He said, I need to power my two 1920 by 1200 monitors and be able to watch videos on them. As I lack a lot of graphics video know-how, I'd greatly like to be able to simply purchase the same graphics card that Alan used in this build and just ensure that it just works. If you could get back to him about which card you have in the build and any problems, he would appreciate it. He said, while I'm taking up your time, he'd like to thank us both for the show and the wonderful insights into FreeBSD and OpenBSD. Looking forward to more episodes, Kyle.
Yeah, with the
is that still what you're using?
But with the NVIDIA driver, pretty much any NVIDIA card will work. It only ever has some issues when you have the laptops with the dual graphics cards.
Sure.
But outside of that, the NVIDIA binary driver is pretty much identical to the Windows one, as far as and it supports every one of their cards.
Well, I was going to say here, I just bought, if I can hold this up, like 3 of these Zotacs. Yep. And what is that? The 640 GTs. I bought them for like $40 on Newegg. I got 3 of them because I'm converting a couple of my kids' systems, which still had Windows on them. They're switching over to PCBSD fully in this next week. But I've already put a couple of these in. They work fine. I bought these because they were cheap and they don't require any extra PCI Express power.
So you don't need
like a crazy. Yeah, if you don't need a crazy Corsair power supply or don't have one, that's the way to go. And they will run dual head 1900 by 1200, no problem.
Yep.
No problem. That's what I'm using on my system here.
I have a bunch of Zotac cards as well from when we used to have a gaming cafe. We had a bunch of the 8800 GTs.
And the NVIDIA driver works. I can watch full screen 1080p YouTube or Flash videos like with acceleration and all that just works. So
NVIDIA is the one thing that pretty much just works. So for there, you're probably better off with what Chris was showing there, the 640s for the $40 or whatever. My card's a little older, but it's a little higher end. I bought this.
Yours is the GTX, mine's a GT.
Yeah, this is actually a gaming rig that I use to play games in the evenings, and so it has a beefier video card than what you would probably put in a workstation.
Okay, cool. Well, there you go. So yeah, that's definitely one way to go. Yep. So grab one of those. I don't anticipate you'd have very many problems, and of course it depends on what you want to do, but $40 for these guys that does everything me and my kids need to do. Not a big deal, including play some games. They all play Minecraft and run those in full screen, and that works in PCBSD as well. So with good frame rates. So I'm happy with it.
So mailing list gold.
Yes, now up to the mailing list gold here. So our first up, we have a post here from the OpenBSD Tech about NTP. I'll let you read through some of these, Alan. My voice is shot now.
This is a post from Theo kind of comparing the ISC NTP daemon to OpenNTPD, which was written from scratch as part of OpenBSD. And they say the open NTPD is not vulnerable to this particular problem. So he says around 10 years ago, it was written by Henning Bauer at request of Theo because the NTPD source scared him quite a bit. He says at the time, communications with the NTP team showed they had little interest in removing unused functionality from the old ntp.org code or any help in the form of a security audit or anything like that. Because they did a rewrite, the major benefit of Open NTPD is that it had privilege separation. So it kept the parts that require root separate from the parts that do all the work. If problems like these were found, they would not be realistically exploitable. Furthermore, OpenNTPD is a modern piece of code that's less than 5,000 lines long compared to the 300,000 that is currently NTPD.
Yeah.
And it says, whereas the ntp.org codebase at the time was 100,000 lines and has since grown. And he says a lot of that is unknown or largely unused code. It's, sections that patches people wrote and got committed, but then haven't maintained and so on. And it's kind of having the same problem that OpenSSL was of having, everybody's working to make it bigger, but nobody's working to clean up after and keep all those bits up to date. And he says it might be a good time to circle the conversation back to the common practice of seeding the random number generator with the current time.
Nice.
And he says it's become abundantly clear that it is very difficult to push lessons regarding better software practices from the greater open source community when the vendors who live off them. So he talks about that and just how in a second post he also has sorry, I didn't see that there was a second URL. Anyway, in the second post he was talking about how not everyone actually needs to have quite that level of time sync, right? They don't need stratum 0 level. You don't have to be synced with an atomic clock. You just need to be approximately correct.
Don't need that.
But it says, you can avoid a lot of code just by being like, well, that's good enough. And, he says there's is claimed that NTPD is more accurate. For the exercise, it's 66 times larger, but is not 66 times more accurate. Even if it's a little bit more accurate, does more accurate mean edge devices that care for more or less, 100 milliseconds? Is there any device that actually cares about being that exact? And if they are, they're probably running something like precision time protocol rather than NTPD. The devices which care about accuracy are doing time distribution, not time reception, right? It's the ones that care about accuracy are the servers, not the clients. And much of the code in NTPD, because it's the server and the client, it contains all this extra stuff, where most of the stuff you don't need that in the client. And so he talks about that more. But yes, this is the same reason that Paul Hannenkamp is working on his stuff. Theo has a note here at the bottom. I'm glad to hear that NTPD is being rewritten because over time, this will bring safety back into focus. PHK, I hope you don't just focus on the math. Use privilege separation, please, and ensure DNS refresh is possible in the architecture you choose. There's a time-tested model which does not require the OS to have this in that non-standard security feature. We all know they can't be mandate use these features, which barely help anyway. So he's hoping that PrivSep will help a lot.
Cool. Okay, next up is Alfred Perlstein actually writes over into the FreeBSD mailing list here. But the interesting part, they're talking about VM stuff here. But he said, funny fact about the EM0 device. Everyone I know who's not a FreeBSD person calls it emo, like emo kids with funny hairstyles. And then he provides a link to the image gallery of what I'm talking about. Nice. Good one, Alfred.
Yeah, actually, we kind of talked about this earlier about whether DHCP should be the default setting on the pre-built virtual machine images. It's like, well, I don't think I'd want that on a server I just installed, but in the pre-built VM images, that does seem like a fairly reasonable default.
Sure.
I'm sure if you look at all the different Linux pre-built virtual machines, you can grab even the official ones from Ubuntu or whatever, they do it. So
because it's a lot easier than not doing it and trying to explain to people how to bring up their networking.
Well,
in their
in particular, if you're going to deploy this image somewhere remote, how else are you going to get access to the machine to configure DHCP and so on? But yeah, that whole thread's fairly interesting. And in particular, what he's talking about also is creating .ova files, so that rather than just giving you the VMDK disk image for FreeBSD, giving you the actual package so that you just double click on it and it launches it in VMware or VirtualBox.
Just starts. And
it creates the VM for you with all the right settings, because apparently a lot of users go into VMware or VirtualBox, they have the disk image they downloaded and they try to create the virtual machine and they accidentally make it 32-bit because that's the default.
Yeah.
And then the 64-bit binaries don't work.
Well, we see ones where people put the wrong NIC on it, or they turn on the wrong CPU settings or whatever.
Not the problem. I think it's the disk controller that can sometimes go wonky.
Yeah, we're looking at I saw this thread earlier. This was sent to me by a couple guys as well, and we'll probably try and make some OVA images here in the near future as well.
Alfred's made a script that does it, but it uses it depends on having VirtualBox installed to actually create it. But in general, an OVA file is actually just a tar with the VMDK, an XML file, and a checksum file. So they could be created manually as well. So
nice.
It looks like we might be able to do that either way. And it'd be nice. I think the VMDK images could be superseded by just offering the OVA, because it's just a tar with the VMDK in it and a text file. So it's...
Right. And so if you want the VMDK, just extract it and ignore the rest.
For everyone else, it's that much easier to just
convenient.
Yeah, it's a file people can download, double click, and as long as they have VirtualBox installed or VMware.
Well, the one thing, I got to check and see the settings, how they translate between VirtualBox and VMware.
As far as telling it which disk controller, that one's it's a standard, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, maybe a little tricky. So anyway, I'll be playing with that probably next week. We'll see if we can get one of those built in time for our next quarterly release.
Yes, and the last one is OpenBSD ports post from Mark Espy.
I got to read the subject.
Java coders are complete morons. He says he's trying to compile JDK 1.7 and it's just stopped working. It was working fine. Nobody changed anything and it just stopped working. While investigating, he found that because one of the files in the distribution set is more than 10 years old, and there's actually an explicit check for that in the build process, and it just stops. It's like, hey, you can't build this because it's more than 10 years old. It's like, well,
nice.
It's not an outdated version of Java. It's still supported, so fix that. He says, just thinking.
I know. I saw that go by in Fresh Ports as well. I was like, oh, I guess OpenJDK can't build if it's more than 10 years old.
I can understand. They really wish they could have killed off 1.6 a lot sooner. There's some people using it, but it seems like they needed to touch that file or something.
Yep.
Silliness.
Okay. Well, cool. Thank you for reading those, Alan. So as we wrap up here, of course, we want to mention that you guys can send in any of your comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want to hear mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Yes.
We would appreciate that. Of course, if you're doing anything really cool with BSD, let us know. We like to talk about that stuff, too.
Or if you have a better answer to any of the questions the viewers wrote in. We don't know everything, but if you do, let us know. Maybe you have a recommendation for that wireless thing, because I haven't done much of it.
Definitely. That would definitely be helpful, since neither one of us have done that. So also watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. We're glad to have you on the live show, where we can interact with you sometimes on IRC and maybe answer some questions live on the air. And of course, we want to mention, have a happy new year, guys. Make 2015 the year you do switch over to a BSD, or switch everything over, as I'm doing in the house here.
Or you start contributing back, make a port, write some docs, write some code, something.
Yeah, support the foundations. Yeah, lots of things you can do in 2015. Get to a conference.
And also don't forget to do backups.
Yes, definitely. So we appreciate having you guys with us this week on the last episode of 2014. Looking forward to an exciting New Year's. So we will see you then.